Okay, I'm going to start to go off the reservation a little bit, but there's actually a lot of value in what I talk about. And so the nature of things is when you look at something, look at the parts, look at how they relate to each other. And so everything has a system that it follows, whether it's changing a tire or whatever. And so by understanding how these parts fit together and how they interact, that's where you can find opportunity. That's where value comes out. And this is the nature of problem solving. Figuring out where you are to where you need to get to and what steps are involved. And so products can have more than one value. You are allowed to have a product that makes you feel good and that's less expensive, for example. What does Apple do? Apple is triggered towards making you feel good about your product and also having utility. They want to wow you. But guess what? You're not getting any break on price. And there are also secondary values. And these are secondary values are the things that can potentially be exploited when you have more than one value. When you design something, great design is a confluence of function and art, meaning it has more than one meaning. When you look at these pictures, the top left, that's the dome at MIT. This makes MIT architecturally stand out. When you look at that, you know it's MIT. Even the top right, that was my dormitory at MIT Baker House. And the thing about Baker House is it was a curved building along the river. Not only was it interesting to look at, but what they were trying to do is create more surface area for windows that faced Boston. That's what you were facing. And so you got a view of the Boston skyline. So utility behind it. At the very bottom is Princeton University's chapel. Now, look at those big tall windows. Not only does it make magnificent architecture, but those big windows are there to serve a second purpose. And that's to let in a lot of light into the church. So as you can see, things can have more than one meaning. Also, how do things fit together? How do shapes go? Look at the magnificence of this photo. That person looms larger than over an entire city, and it's how they fit. Look at how her diagonal line breaks up all the vertical lines, so she stands out and becomes noticed, and that the color lights center it. It's where your eyes go. And so this larger fit can have meaning. An example is Southwest Airlines, when we want to look at design and fit of things, and that's that what they did is they scrapped everything that traditionally the airlines did, like have meals in first class and things like that, and they focused on point to point. And a lot of people thought that these secondary points of having no meals and things like that would crush Southwest, and that's not what happened. And so did they really revolutionize a business? Well, yes and no. Meaning, point to point works really well if you're going over short distances. On the other hand, if you're going over very long distances, you want a meal. A hub brings about great efficiencies for an airline. And so what did Southwest do? When they started going longer distances, they became just like the traditional airlines. So what is context? Context are those macro forces that take place in the world. And they take shape of these forms, and you can read about it. Technology changes the context of things. What you could do back in 1950 is very much different than today. Legal issues change what you can do, and so on and so forth. And some examples of context is like internationally, the electric car is having a tough time getting traction here, but on the other hand, if you're in a place like China or India that has air quality problems, they love the electric car. Things change socially. We now recycle, whereas in the 1980s nobody did. Things that happen in the government, for example, deregulation is one way. Boy, I'm picking all kinds of good examples. I mean, cheery examples. And when the Black Swan took place in 2007 in the market crash, all of a sudden it was a tough time being in a lot of businesses. And so technology, again, changes our world. And so an example is like computers. How did the value of computers change over time? Well, originally they were just a science instrument, and they became a communication device once the internet got started, because now we were all connected. And then it started to become a social instrument around 2003, where people started doing online education now. And now what is our computer? It's our connection for everything. Everything social and education and everything else. And so it went from being a geek tool to a portal to everything. The thing about context is it could lead to a lack of vision. For example, incumbents just want to do the way they do things right now. They don't want the world to change. And so, unless you want to be left behind, you have to constantly challenge your assumptions. And so, you have to remove your biases. And if you don't have those biases and you can look at things on how they actually exist, then your potential to grow is pretty much unlimited. And here's an example of looking at things in different ways. And that's that there's a shoe salesman in the Outback, and he calls his office and said, "This is a terrible market. Nobody wears shoes." And then another salesman goes running to the phone, and he tells his office, "This is a great market. Nobody wears shoes." And so this is actually your discussion point for you and your group to talk about who's actually right. And so an example of having vision is that watchmakers, traditionally watches were just timepieces or super expensive pieces for people of the rich. And what happened is technology came along where they could make really good plastics. And so a little town in Switzerland decided to make plastic watches. But, plastic watches look kind of cheap, so they focused on fashion, because that's the other value that a watch has. And subsequently, this was the Swatch industry. U.S. Steel collapsed because steel was a lot cheaper to process overseas. They have modern factories. Oh no, it's the end for us. And what ended up happening, though, again, is you have to look at it from different perspectives, look at the context. And what Nucor Steel did is they realized, hey, you know something? They still have to ship tons of material across an ocean. We need to take advantage of that. And so instead of building these monster mills, they made these little mini mills. And they realized that there were only a couple places in the United States that could act as good hubs for sending their steel out. So that's what they did. And so they beat foreign steel on its own terms because they took advantage of and I have absolutely no idea what happened to my lecture. There it goes. But they built mini mills. And so next, we'll talk about the value chain.